Or what more I can tell you. You can find it online. Ownership by deception. All humans are born into this 3D reality as free beings, and any claim of ownership over them by any individual or agency is a fiction. Despite this truth, the dark priest class have indeed duped most of the human population into consenting to their own ownership. This is achieved by way of the so-called legal system that's in place in much of the Western world, and in many other countries such as Australia and New Zealand. Anything that is claimed to be legal as opposed to lawful is a fiction. True rights and laws can only be granted by the creative force behind the universe. Any claim to legality by any man is a fallacy. The system of so-called law in place in most of these countries is derived from the system of maritime or admiralty law used in England during the seafaring days of empire. Maritime law has come to replace common law, or the law of the land, which is a system more closely linked to natural law and the recognition of the inherent rights to freedom with which all humans are born. Through clever use of language and the double meaning of words, the controllers have tricked individuals into having corporate entities created in their name. These corporations remain the wholly owned property of the Crown Corporation of the City of London, the head of which is the British monarch. The City of London, rather like the relationship of the Vatican to Italy and Washington DC to the United States, is an entirely autonomous state separate from England, with its own mayor, its own police force, and its own set of laws. When you step into the square mile, you're no longer in England. Despite her position as its figurehead, the Queen is required to request permission to enter its territory, and as part of the structure of hierarchy with which the elites seem so obsessed, is considered subservient to the mayor for as long as she's in the territory. Readers can make up their own minds as to the symbolic relevance of the dragon statue, which marks the entrance to the city's square mile, which is beyond the realms of this particular book. This deception, which sees humans signed over as the property of the state and considered akin to seafaring vessels, is achieved ingeniously by way of one particular document: the birth certificate. Word magic is at work here. Birth phonetically is identical to berth, which is what a ship is said to be in when docked, and the meanings are taken to be interchangeable. When a human is born, they're delivered via the birth canal, in the same way that a ship is said to arrive. What well-meaning parents throughout the world have no idea of, because they're not openly told, is that the birth certificate forms a bonding contract between the parents and the Crown Corporation, whereby the child in question is represented as a corporate entity, separate to the flesh and blood sovereign individual. From the moment the contract is signed, that child is considered the property of the state, and bonds are issued and traded on the stock market in his or her name. This is why the individual is then required to apply for documents such as driving licenses and passports, and becomes liable to pay taxes, because within the legal fiction that they've unwittingly been entered into, they're owned property. This state of affairs can only exist in a fiction, because no individual can truly be owned by any other individual or organisation. An indication of the fact that a corporate entity, rather than the flesh and blood being that it represents, is being addressed, is when official government correspondence spells out the name in capital letters. More double-meaning wordplay here, this style of lettering indicating that the subject is the capital or property of the state. This is why communications from the Inland Revenue in particular, along with most other government departments, always show the recipient's name in capital letters, while their address generally appears in both upper and lower case. As far as the system sees it, a contract has been entered into by the parents through their own free will, stating that their child is now the property of the state, and the use of capital letters is their fair warning, harking back to the previous concepts of consent, of what's going on, The fact that you didn't understand it is of no consequence to them in their warped mindset. They told you in their own way. The issue of ambiguous contracts was the subject of a story which emerged in 2010 when, for an April Fool's Day prank, the retailer GameStation issued a contract whose terms and conditions stated that those signing it undertook to give up their mortal souls. 84% of those receiving the contract duly signed it without noticing what they'd just agreed to. There are some clear parallels here with what goes on in the real world on a daily basis. Information about this grand method of deception is now freely available on the internet and has led to huge numbers of individuals seeking to disassociate themselves from their government owners. It's led to a move towards losing the legal name, in recognition that the identity on a birth certificate is fraudulent and not truly representative of the individual using it. Those particularly well informed on how the maritime law setup works have even started defending themselves in courts of fraudulent law, arguing that by renouncing their birth certificate, they no longer have any contractual ties to the Crown and are therefore not bound by any of its laws. It remains a fact, however, that very few have been successful in challenging the system on this basis without huge personal cost to themselves and their families. It would be a different story, however, if vast numbers of people were to do so in unison, fully armed with the knowledge of how they've been deceived into a contract that has no legality under natural law, the only true and binding law in the universe. This whole subject area is a complicated minefield, loaded with word magic, but it can be investigated fully online by any individual with sufficient curiosity and the time to delve into it. Choices and consequences. For a good couple of years, I puzzled, like so many others, over why the elites do some of the seemingly strange things they do, such as apparently pre-announcing their plans through popular culture and leaving their symbolic calling cards everywhere. At all levels of the control system there are disclaimers such as this, some more blatant than others. We find expressions of it in the small print at the bottom of financial contracts, in public notices advising you that you're being filmed by CCTV, in the side effects, so effects then, documented with pharmaceutical drugs, and with the lists of double-barrelled, multi-syllabled chemicals on cans of fizzy drinks. Less obviously, as readers will recall from the chapter on predictive programming, we find highly veiled announcements of the controller's future false flag events encoded into Hollywood movies, TV programs, music videos, and record sleeves. It was only after I came to understand how everything in creation is bound by the workings of natural law that the penny dropped. I suddenly realised that when the powers that shouldn't be do such things, it's their sick and twisted way of observing the laws of morality that are built into the construct of the universe.